Morning of my son's wedding, I ironed my dress twice. That is the kind of thing you do when you are 63 years old and you have been waiting for this day longer than your son has. You iron the dress, you hang it on the back of the bathroom door, you stand there looking at it like it might disappear if you stop watching. Ivory linen, knee-length, with small pearl buttons at the cuffs. I had bought it 4 months ago at a little boutique in Asheville, North Carolina, where my sister lives, and I had not let myself try it on again, because I was afraid I would love it too much and jinx the whole thing. My son, Lawrence, was getting married. That sentence still felt brand new every time I thought it. He was 41 years old, which I know sounds late, but Lawrence was never in a hurry for anything. He took 6 years to finish college. He stayed at the same accounting firm for 14 years before making partner. He dated a woman named Renee for 3 years before finally ending things quietly, without drama, without anyone quite knowing why. Lawrence was the kind of man who made decisions slowly and kept them forever. And so when he called me 11 months ago to tell me he had met someone, I knew before he even finished the sentence that this was serious. Her name was Simone. She was 38, a hospital administrator, originally from Atlanta. She had 2 children from her first marriage, a boy of 12 and a girl of 9, and she wore her hair natural and had a laugh that filled up whatever room she was standing in. I liked her the first time I met her. I liked her the second time too. By the third time, something had shifted, though I could not have told you exactly what. She was not unkind to me. That would be too easy, too obvious. She was perfectly polite. She remembered to ask about my hip surgery. She sent a thank you note on actual stationery after the first dinner at my house. She included me in the engagement announcement. Had Lawrence text me a photo of the ring the same night he proposed. All the right things, in all the right order. But there was something in the way she looked at my house when she first walked through it. A small pause at the doorway of the living room. Eyes moving over the built-in bookshelves, the fireplace, the oil painting above the mantel that my late husband Raymond had commissioned for our 30th anniversary. It was not admiration in her eyes. It was closer to calculation. And then it was gone, and she was smiling, and I thought I had imagined it. I have a nice house. I want to say that plainly because it matters to the story. Raymond died 7 years ago and left me very well situated. The house in Raleigh is paid off. There is a small vacation property in the Outer Banks that we bought in 1998, and which is worth considerably more now than it was then. Raymond had life insurance, a pension from 30 years at Duke Energy, and investments that our financial advisor has managed carefully. I am not wealthy by any dramatic standard, but I am comfortable in a way that my children have always known about and that I have tried not to make into a defining thing. Lawrence is my only son. I also have a daughter, but she lives in Seattle, and this is not her story. My driver, a man named Otto, had worked for our family for 9 years. I want to explain Otto because people always raise an eyebrow when I say, my driver. It sounds extravagant. It is not. After my hip surgery 2 years ago, my orthopedist told me I should not be driving long distances alone, and my daughter set up the arrangement with a local car service, and Otto was the man they sent. He was 67, originally from the Czech Republic, had been in the United States for 30 years, and drove a very clean, dark blue town car. He drove me to medical appointments. He drove me to the airport when I visited my sister. He drove me to dinner when I did not want to deal with parking. He was quiet in the way that earns trust rather than losing it, and over 9 years he had become someone I thought of not exactly as a friend, but as something close to it. The kind of person you could sit in silence with for 40 minutes and feel completely comfortable. He knew Raymond had died. He had driven us to the hospital the last time. He did not make a production of any of it. The morning of the wedding, Otto arrived at my house at 10 o'clock to take me to the venue, a restored historic estate outside of Chapel Hill that Simone had found, and that cost more per hour than I prefer to think about. Lawrence had offered to contribute to the venue cost, and Simone had said no, that her parents would handle it, and I had stayed out of that conversation entirely. I was ready when Otto pulled up. Dress ironed, hair done, small gold earrings that had been Raymond's mother's. I locked the front door and walked down the porch steps, and Otto got out of the car to open my door, which he always did. He looked at me for a moment, just a beat longer than usual, and then he said, "You look wonderful, Mrs. Harmon." "Thank you, Otto," I said. "Let's go get my son married." The drive was 40 minutes. We talked about nothing in particular. He asked how my hip was doing. I asked about his grandson, who had just started kindergarten. We listened to the radio for a while. It was a beautiful October morning, the kind where the light comes through the trees at a low angle, and everything looks like it has been lacquered. We arrived at the estate 45 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Otto pulled around to the side entrance where the wedding coordinator had told me to come in, and I went inside to find my seat and drop off my wrap. The coordinator, a young woman with a clipboard, told me Lawrence was in the groom's suite with his groomsmen and that Simone's coordinator would let him know I had arrived. I found my seat in the front row, left side, and then realized I had left my reading glasses in the car. The program had small print. I went back out through the side entrance to get them. The parking area around the side of the building was quiet. Most guests had not arrived yet. Otto had pulled the town car into a spot near the garden wall, and I could see he was still sitting inside. I walked over, tapped on the passenger window. He rolled it down. "I left my glasses," I said. He reached into the glove compartment, handed them to me. I was about to thank him and go back inside when he said quietly, without quite looking at me, "Mrs. Harmon, before you go." Something in his voice stopped me. "There are 2 people in the garden," he said, "just past that wall. They don't know I'm here. I got out to stretch my legs about 20 minutes ago, and I heard them. I almost said something to you right away. I'm still not sure if I should." I looked at him. "Who?" He hesitated. "Your son's fiancée, and a man I don't recognize." I did not say anything. "I don't want to upset you before the ceremony," Otto said, "but I think you would want to know. I think—" He stopped. Started again. "I've worked for your family a long time, Mrs. Harmon. Tell me what you heard," I said. He told me. The man in the garden was someone named Fletcher. That much Otto had gathered from the conversation. He was someone Simone had known before. How well, Otto could not say. What he could say was what he had heard them talking about, and he told me carefully and without embellishment the way he did everything. Simone had said, "The house is in her name only. He's not on it." Fletcher had said, "What about the beach place?" Simone had said, "Also hers. But once we're married, in North Carolina, if we can get her to add him to the deed," Fletcher had said, "and if she won't—" There was a pause. Then Simone had said, "She's 63, her hip is bad. Lawrence is patient." And then she had laughed, and it was not the laugh that filled up a room. It was something smaller and harder and private. I stood at the car window and felt the morning change around me. I do not know how to describe what it is to hear something like that. It is not quite anger, at least not at first. It is more like the feeling when you step off a curb you did not know was there. That fraction of a second of falling before anything else registers. My son was inside this building in a rented tuxedo, happy in the way he had not been happy in years, and the woman he was about to marry was in the garden, talking to someone about my property and my age, and how long they might need to wait. "Are you certain of what you heard?" I asked Otto. "I am," he said. He was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at me straight on. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Harmon." I put my glasses in my purse. I stood there for a moment in the October light, and I thought about what to do. There are things you cannot unhear. There are also things you cannot undo. If I walked inside and said nothing, my son would marry this woman in 40 minutes. If I walked inside and said something, I would be the mother who ruined her son's wedding, and even if Lawrence believed me, which I was not certain he would, even if he walked away from the altar today, what would that cost him? He was 41 years old. He had waited a long time to feel the way he had been feeling this past year. I thought about Raymond. He had been a quiet man too, in the way Otto was quiet. He thought carefully before he spoke, and he had passed exactly none of that quality on to our daughter, and all of it onto our son. What would Raymond have done, standing at this car window, in this parking lot, with this information? He would have gotten the facts first. He would have been sure. Stay here, I told Otto. I walked around the garden wall. Simone was standing near a stone bench, wearing her bridal robe over what I assumed was her dress. Her hair was pinned up, not yet finished. The man beside her was tall, sandy-haired, somewhere in his 40s, in a suit that was too light for a North Carolina October. They both saw me at the same moment. Simone's face went through several things in rapid succession. I watched all of them. "Mrs. Harmon," she said. "You're—" I was just. "This is my cousin Fletcher. He drove up from Charlotte last night." "I know who he is," I said, which was not exactly true, but it landed the way I needed it to. There was a silence that felt long. "I'm going to say this once," I told her, "and then I'm going to go inside and sit in the front row, and you are going to go finish getting ready, and we are going to see what you decide to do with the next 20 minutes. I looked at her evenly. "I know what you said. I know what you're thinking about, and I want you to understand that none of it will work. The house is in a trust established in 2021. The property in the Outer Banks is in the same trust. Lawrence is a beneficiary, but he has no authority to modify the terms, and neither would a spouse. I have an estate attorney in Raleigh who set all of this up specifically so that it could not be touched. And I did it after Raymond died, because I have watched what happens to family assets in second-generation marriages, and I was not interested in a repeat." This was all true. I had done all of it, not because I suspected anything, not because I had seen this coming, simply because Raymond had told me to in one of our last real conversations, and because he was usually right about these things. Fletcher had not said a word. He was looking at his shoes. "What happens now," Simone said, "is up to you," I told her. "I am not going to tell my son what I heard. That is not my conversation to have. If you love him, I think you know what that means. And if you don't—" I paused. "I think you also know what that means." I turned around and walked back inside. I sat in the front row for 18 minutes. I did not look at anyone. I read the wedding program twice, forwards and backwards, without taking in a single word. A string quartet played something I did not recognize. Guests filed in around me, my son's best friend, a man named Douglas who had known Lawrence since second grade, sat beside me and squeezed my hand and said, "You doing okay, Mrs. H?" And I said, "Just happy," and he believed me. At 11:14, the coordinator came to the front of the room and spoke quietly to Douglas, who was serving as a groomsman. He went back to the groom's suite. At 11:20, Lawrence came and found me himself. He crouched down in the aisle next to my seat. His face was not easy to read, but I had been reading it for 41 years. "Mom," he said, "Simone isn't feeling well. We're going to have to postpone." I looked at him. "Are you okay?" He took a breath. "I'm working on it." He did not look like a man who had been told his fiancée was sick. He looked like a man who had just had a conversation that rearranged something inside him. Whatever Simone had said to him in those 20 minutes, it was enough. "Okay," I said. "Do you need me to stay?" "No," he said. "Go home. I'll call you tonight." Otto drove me home. I sat in the back and watched the trees go by and did not say anything for the first 20 minutes. Then I said, "Thank you, Otto." He said, "Of course, Mrs. Harmon." I said, "I mean it. I mean all of it. 9 years of it." He nodded. He kept his eyes on the road. After a moment, he said, Mister?" Harmon was a good man. I always thought he'd have wanted someone watching out for you. I did not cry until I got inside the house, and then I sat in Raymond's chair in the living room and cried for a while, for several reasons. And then I stopped and made myself a cup of tea and called my estate attorney's office on Monday morning and told her what had happened and asked her to review everything. She said the trust was airtight. I already knew that. I just needed to hear it again. Lawrence called me that Sunday evening. He told me the engagement was off. He did not give me details, and I did not ask for them. I asked if he was eating, and he said yes. I asked if he needed company, and he said not yet. I told him I loved him, and he said he knew, and that was enough for that conversation. Over the following weeks, he came to dinner twice. He did not bring up Simone. I did not either. He ate pot roast and helped me change a light bulb in the upstairs hallway and sat in the living room watching football with the sound low, the way he used to do when he was in high school. And something was weighing on him, and he did not yet have the words for it. On the third Sunday, he finally said it. She told me herself, he said during a commercial. That morning, she said she needed to tell me something before we went out there. I waited. She said she had been talking to Fletcher about our finances, about how things would work after we were married. She said it started as just planning, and then it became something else. She said she was ashamed. He was quiet for a moment. Do you believe her? I asked. He thought about it. I believe she's ashamed now, he said. I don't know if that's the same thing. It was the wisest thing I had heard him say in a long time. It sounded like his father. I'm sorry, I said. I know how much you cared about her. Yeah, he said. He picked up the remote and turned the sound back up, and we watched the rest of the game in comfortable, familiar silence. In December, I had Otto drive me to the attorney's office to update a few documents. Nothing dramatic, some language clarifications, updated beneficiary designations. Standard maintenance, the kind you do every few years just to keep things current. But I also added something. I had thought about this for weeks. I thought about Otto's face at the car window that October morning, the careful way he had chosen his words, the fact that he had waited and deliberated and decided, finally, that 9 years of loyalty meant he owed me the truth, even when the truth was painful. I thought about how he had known Raymond, how he had driven Raymond to his last cardiology appointment and then to the hospital, and then 3 weeks later had shown up to the funeral and stood in the back, quietly, in his good coat, without being asked. I added a specific bequest to my will, a meaningful one, enough to matter. My attorney raised her eyebrows slightly when I told her the amount. He's my driver, I said. All right, she said, and wrote it down. Lawrence came with me to the Outer Banks for a week the following spring. We walked on the beach in the early mornings when the water was still cold and the light was just coming up, and we talked about Raymond and about Lawrence's work and about the small things that make up a life when the larger ones are still settling. He seemed better, not healed, but moving. On the last morning, he told me he thought he wanted to start going to church again, not for God exactly, but for the community of it, the rhythm. Your father would have liked hearing that, I said. I know, he said. I think that's part of why. We drove home on a Sunday afternoon with the windows down because the weather was exactly right for it, and I thought about the wedding morning and the garden and the stone bench in the October light, and the long chain of small decisions, Raymond telling me to protect the assets, the attorney who set it up carefully, Otto getting out of the car to stretch his legs at exactly the right moment, that had led to this quiet, ordinary, salvaged afternoon with my son. There is no dramatic ending to this story. Simone moved back to Atlanta, I heard, and I genuinely hope she is all right. Lawrence is doing well. He had dinner last week with a woman he met through a colleague and came home afterward sounding lighter than he has in months. I am not reading anything into it. I am just noting it. Otto retired in February. His grandson had started playing soccer and he wanted to be at the games. We had dinner at a restaurant near my house, E and I, a proper dinner, and he ordered the steak, and I had the salmon, and we talked for 2.5 hours about almost everything except that October morning, which neither of us needed to revisit. When we said goodnight in the parking lot, he held my hand for a moment, the formal European way, and said, "It has been a privilege, Mrs. Harmon." "For me too," I said, and I meant every word of it. Some people come into your life through grand gestures. They announce themselves. They make sure you know they're there. And some people just show up, quietly, year after year, in a clean, dark blue town car. And they watch out for you in ways you don't always see until the moment you need them most. Raymond was right about a lot of things. He was especially right about that. I have thought about that October morning more times than I can count. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, more the way you return to a photograph you didn't know you were taking until it was already developed. You look at it and think, that was the moment. That was the one that changed the direction of things. What I keep coming back to is not Simone and not Fletcher and not even what I said to her by that stone bench. What I keep coming back to is the long chain of ordinary decisions that had to happen in exactly the right order for everything to turn out the way it did. Raymond telling me in one of our last real conversations to put the house and the beach property into a trust. My Tenny doing it carefully, without shortcuts. Me actually following through on it instead of putting it off the way I might have. Otto getting out of the car to stretch his legs at exactly the right moment. And then, and this is the part that still gets me, deciding that 9 years of working for a family meant he owed them the truth, even when the truth was painful and the timing was the worst it could possibly be. None of those things were dramatic. None of them felt like protection when they were happening. They were just choices, made quietly, over years, by people trying to do the right thing in ordinary circumstances. And then one morning, they all lined up at once, and they became a wall that nothing could get through. I think that is what people mean when they talk about integrity, though they rarely put it that plainly. Integrity is not what you do when everything is on the line. It is what you do on a Tuesday afternoon, when no one is watching and nothing urgent is happening. Raymond protected the assets because it was the responsible thing to do, not because he suspected anyone. Otto told me what he heard because it was honest, not because he expected anything in return. I sat in that garden and said what I said to Simone calmly, without cruelty, because I had decided long ago that I did not want to be a person who acts out of panic. The outcomes followed from the choices. That is the part I want to be clear about, because it is easy to look at a story like this and think it was luck. It was not luck. It was decades of small decisions about who to be, made by imperfect people who were mostly just trying to do right by each other. Lawrence is going to be okay. I know that the way I know most things about him, not from what he says, but from watching him sit in his father's living room in the early evening, quiet and steady, moving forward in the way that is native to him. He was hurt. He will carry some of that. But he is also wiser now, and wisdom that costs something tends to stay. And Otto. I think about Otto a lot. What he did that morning took courage that most people would not have had, and he did it without any expectation of reward. He just thought, this person needs to know. That is a rare quality. It is rarer than talent, rarer than intelligence, and it cannot be faked over 9 years in a town car. You either have that kind of character or you don't, and Otto had it. And I am glad he was in my life, and I hope what I put in that document tells him something of what I could not quite say at dinner. Take care of the people who tell you the truth. Protect what matters before you need to, and pay attention to the quiet ones. They are usually the ones who show up when it counts.